This is episode number 55 of the Grueler Nation podcast. My name is Robert Grueler, joined today by Raymond LaFleur. Raymond, thank you so much for being here today. Let me give the audience just a quick intro on a little bit about you. So you're an author, you're a musician, father, you're working on your theology degree, you're a ministerial assistant, and as of late, you are the leader in a new program that is helping people recover from substance abuse. It's called the 24/7 Sobriety Success Educational Series. And I'm really excited to talk to you about a lot of this. A lot of what I do in my life intersects with a number of these different areas. But let's start first and foremost. Can you give us kind of a quick overview before we talk a little bit about your background and learn how you came into developing this whole program? Tell me a little bit about what the 24/7 Sobriety Success Educational Series is. What is it all about?
Rob, thanks so much. It's great to be here today. 24/7 Sobriety Success is a way to, an online platform, educational series that reaches into, wherever people are that are wrestling with substance abuse disorder and addiction, in a way to give them really kind of a structured daily infusion of resources, inspiration, and point the way to coming onto the dry ground of sobriety or staying there. So this is educational piece that it directly comes out of my own wrestling with addiction, and so we're excited about getting it developed and out there.
Yeah, and I've seen the curriculum. I know it's very robust. I know it's been something that you've been working on for a long time, and there's plenty of room for more people talking about this and more people helping. And your model seems to be a little bit different, right? I mean, it's an online platform, so it kind of is providing people with kind of immediately accessible resources and tools. And it's a long program. How long do you expect the program to take an average person?
Yeah, this core offering of the program is about 60 days, 2 months, 63 days. So it's broken up into 9 modules. Each module is a week long.
Yeah. So, what's funny when we talk about recovery and sobriety, there's kind of this gatekeeper thing that happens in this space. So people who are in recovery or who are trying to become sober or addressing substance abuse problems, they will lend, I think, a little bit more credibility to other people who have gone through that versus somebody who didn't. So in other words, if you're somebody who's in recovery yourself and you want to go and speak to another group of people who are in recovery, you have a little bit more legitimacy than maybe a random doctor who's never suffered from substance abuse problems, who just says, well, I read a book about it and now I can teach you how to become sober because I read it in a book somewhere. Obviously, people who listen to my show, they may have picked up on the fact that I'm somebody who is an AA advocate. I'm a 12-step guy. I think it's a good thing for people. I know that's a little bit about your story also, right? So you've also gone through this. You are somebody who also suffered from some substance abuse problems. Can you tell us about that story? I know it's a long story, but can we dive into that today?
I'm happy to, Rob. Sure. This comes from, it stems back, it's a family, it's passed down. My father was alcoholic.
Yeah.
And he came from a family where, it was, you don't talk about your problems, you just kind of suck it up and pull it up by the bootstraps and just get it done.
Yeah.
But yet work hard, play hard. And so that kind of it's a generational that can get passed on. And it was, Mom always talked about, make sure that you are wary of that you understand kind of the history with your dad and where you come from, and to not drink and use drugs, right? That's the message that we want to get out there, but it's not always quite that simple. We hear that, but when we're teenagers or early 20s, we're not always listening to the message.
Sure. Yeah. It's not going to happen to me type of attitude, right? Just
right. You're not thinking ahead to consequences. You're just living in the moment.
Yeah.
And so, coming through high school and into my early college years, just my use of alcohol and drug use just started to increase. It was trying to figure out where I fit in out west
Yeah.
in the Great West, moving from the Boston area and coming out here. And it was, quickly life became unmanageable
Yeah.
for me. And so there was a lot of hills and valleys. So it tends to be, you talked about how there's kind of a credential of speaking to people
Yeah.
about addiction and alcoholism when you've already been there. There is this kind of discernment you get after a while.
Yeah.
When you made a decision to say, okay, it stops with me. I've lived through this. My family's lived through this. It's going to stop with me now. I'm making a decision to turn things around. I'm going to start a new path, enter a new season of my life. These things maybe were part of my childhood or an immaturity that I had. Now it's time to be a man, to stand up. And also there's a real kind of brokenness that I had. And it wasn't something I could do on my own. I needed to reach out to other people for help, reach out for good counsel, reach out for wisdom from other people and lean on that.
Yeah, and so you've devoted a big part of your time now to helping other people. Before we go into that, though, I want people to be clear on exactly, as long as you're okay about it, be clear on. I mean, you didn't just wake up one morning and say, "Well, I think I had a little too much to drink last night. I guess I should probably get sober now." Right? I mean, this was something that you struggled with, and you had some pretty severe consequences throughout your journey.
Rob, it was a process of coming in and out of sobriety. Coming into, falling away through running into the legal system.
Yeah.
So it happened with DUIs, and I actually had my first DUI back in the year 2000. So that's 19 years ago. And that was a wake-up call. And I came into sobriety for a period of time, yet I hadn't got to the root of the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, just kind of, I'm doing okay, and just kind of get pulled back into that lifestyle again.
Yeah.
And then a second DUI happened pretty quickly, and that was more of a wake-up call.
Mm-hmm.
And then some more time came by, and spent years of sobriety,
Mm-hmm.
but then falling back again. So it was a process. By my fourth DUI in 2010, it was, I'd had a family at that point,
Yeah.
2 young children, and it was serious business.
Yeah. Yeah. And legally, I mean, as people probably know, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. When you start stacking up that number of DUIs, the consequences are severe. I mean, you don't get a slap on the wrist. You don't get a slap on the wrist for any DUI in Arizona.
Right.
It's a difficult state for those things. Some states, like California, I'm also licensed there. You can go and you can have a super extreme DUI and you don't even spend a day in jail as long as you go and do some substance abuse stuff. Here, you start stacking up a number of different DUIs and you go to prison for that. Right. And that's something that happened in your case, unfortunately. But as a result of all of that, it's sometimes people will go through all of this and they'll come out and they'll feel like they've got no value and they can't do anything with what their past is. But you've not done that. I mean, you've gone through this experience and now you're on a mission to help other people.
Yes, it was. You hear about people who go into self-sabotage.
Mm-hmm.
So you have some momentum and the positive things you're doing in your life, and then you'll kind of turn around the next moment and throw it away with addiction behavior.
Yeah.
So this was like, okay, now it stops. Now I'm going to throw away the self-sabotage. It's like, I'm going to close that door and dedicate 100% to stepping forward onto a new path.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a wake-up call. So when I was faced with prison time,
Yeah.
for a DUI, and it was a wake-up call that said, I'm going to get sober. I'm going to get to the root of my issues. I'm going to reach out for help. I'm going to do it every day. I'm going to continue to work and I'm not going to go back to that
Yeah.
self-sabotaging behavior now. So I had to get right, and I had to find that light within myself before I could share it with anybody else. So I was determined at that point to harness, healing, and so that I could turn around and share with other people. I tell a story for people that the day before I went in to serve a 4-month jail sentence, I actually had breakfast with my mom and dad.
Yeah.
And they're like, saying goodbye, and it was, kind of dramatic, and it
Sure.
was this really, it was a lot of gravity in the situation. So
Yeah,
I sat down with them, and we were at a Denny's actually having some breakfast, and
I love Denny's.
I hadn't talked to them in a while, really, about a lot of things. And so I shared with them some places I had been, some of the hopes I had for my future when I got out of this
Yeah.
whole mess. And during the process of that conversation, I shared with them a book I had read called Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach. Short little book, but it's about a seagull who's scavenging on the shore, and he decides, I don't want to just stay picking at the shore for scraps. I want to fly out to the sea. I want to soar. I want to learn to, to dive and fly, and, learn how to become what he's capable of becoming.
Mm-hmm.
This was kind of my story at that point. I had been kind of in and out of addiction and just not really knowing how to get free from that place. So I share with him that story, and, the next day I self-surrendered and started a 4-month sentence. Well, there's a whole intake process you go through with the jail system, and finally I land in a bunk bed, the third bunk in a big warehouse in Maricopa County, and about 1 a.m. in the morning. And that next morning I woke up and opened my eyes, a little bit blurry, and all sorts of strange sounds and smells around me. So when I opened my eyes, Rob, I look across from me at the third bunk, and maybe about 2 feet away.
Yeah.
And there's a kid, maybe 25 years old, there. And I see on his pillow this blue book with a white bird. The same book, Jonathan Livingston Seagull,
Wow.
sitting on the pillow right there of this gentleman. He said, it's the first book I've ever read, and I really kind of like it. So for me, it was a reassurance that I wasn't going into this thing alone, that there was help, that there was hope. There was hope.
Mm-hmm.
For a long time, I really didn't think there was hope. I had screwed up a number of times in a number of ways along the path, and you start to get discouraged. But even though I had to face, some difficult consequences to my actions, at that point I knew there was hope, and this thing was going to turn around and be used for something good.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's funny, I think we all kind of have those stories to a certain effect. It's like you in AA and 12-step programs and a lot of the recovery stuff, they all have those cute little kind of quips that they have, like, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, so sometimes people just go, all right, enough already. They just wake up and they have an epiphany, I'm never going to drink again, and that works for them. They're just good with that. But your story is a little bit more intense. You were kind of, they call it like a high bottom or a low bottom. Have you ever heard that expression? Yours was fairly low, right? By the time you had that kind of moment of an epiphany, you're in custody in a bunk, stacked 3 high, and you look across the way and you kind of realize, hey, that book's still there. Maybe it's a divine calling. Maybe it's just, kind of the fate of your life and your universe. But that's pretty incredible. And so from that point forward, how did you then, obviously you had to serve your time in custody, but when you got out, how did you use that moment to transform yourself or to continue that process?
And it started while I was in custody. He and I became friends to a point and started sharing about, the need for changes and looking on the bright side of life. Mm-hmm. And then that propelled me, coming out and starting fresh. And it was just a lot of gratitude. Mm-hmm. It started with each day kind of being gratitude and starting in that place, without anybody looking. It's just you wake up in the morning, you put your left foot down and your right foot down, and you're saying, hey, I'm grateful that I have breath in my lungs and this life to live today. Yeah. So it really started with a gratitude each and every day. And as I began to kind of take steps in a new direction, I I started writing.
Yeah.
And I had done a lot of writing while I was in this whole process in reflection. And it was about 4 years ago that I was approached by Canon Stephen Dart from an Anglican church parish up in Carefree, Arizona. He had a conversation with, a gentleman named Bill Mickelson from South Dakota. Mm-hmm. Bill was the president, who's actually passing the torch now, but of the 24/7 sobriety group that formed out of South Dakota.
Okay.
And this is a different way to deal with DUIs. Instead of jail, it's you're sentenced to sobriety.
Yeah.
And, you continue to drive, you stay with your family, you stay in your job. So they got connected and they realized, well, the testing that's happening with 24/7 sobriety, we're kind of missing an educational piece. So Canon Dart approached me and said, would you be interested? He knew my story well. He'd been with me through that whole process and asked me if I'd be willing to write and share my story. So I began at that point to start putting this together.
That's when you started working with or sort of endeavoring for the 24/7 Sobriety Success educational series.
Correct.
And that program now is the vision of that is it's a national type of program where basically anybody who's going through this can go and follow the different modules that you have to find some relief.
Correct. It can be anyone from an individual basis to different jurisdictions around the country that want to use this. Facilitators can use this for their groups that want to access the information. So,
is there an idea that this program is going to interface with some entities in the criminal justice system? I mean, I think that's what you were kind of alluding to in South Dakota. So they'll, as part of a penalty for getting a DUI there, they will sort of encourage you to go through this program.
Right. Well, yeah, the educational piece was something missing from what they were doing, and so they encouraged us to develop this. So we're in conversation with them now about how to integrate what we're doing into what they're doing. So there's some opportunities here. We had a kind of a justice project we were working on to help encourage DUI reform here in Arizona. And so that kind of raised some awareness and started the conversation going. There isn't anything official now. We did get a number on a bill that was sponsored that didn't go to vote, but out of that, last year and a year and a half ago, there is a pilot program that is looking to start of 24/7 down in Pinal County, down in Tucson.
Interesting.
And potentially in Tempe as well. So we were asked originally to present down there with them to roll this out when they get ready.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and I had not heard about that, either one of those pilot programs. So that is interesting. The difficult thing is that it's in our law. If you're convicted of a DUI, you go to jail. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just a difficult state to get a DUI in. But all right, so you've been working on this program for a number of years. It sounds like now, or for a good amount of time, and you've got these different modules that the person will go through. I know you said it takes about 60 days. And I'm looking at them. Some of them, the first module is about getting started. The second one is about emotional intelligence. And then module 3 is mental health and relationships and recovering, avoiding relapse, and so on and so forth. It just goes on and on. So you've got these 9 different modules, and they're very robust. I mean, I'm looking through them, and they've got a number of different sub-modules, and it's a lot of content. What are some of your influences, or what is, and I know you're the author of a lot of this, what are some, where did you get the inspiration, or are you assembling, best practices from different modalities, or how did this all come into fruition?
So, yes, it is a lot of assembling of best practices and leaning on the wisdom in the voices of those who have gone before me. So I'm not an expert on anything. I have my experiences and the victories and failures that I've had. So I thought, okay, well, let's join my voice in with the voice of others. There are a lot of influences, just for one example, you have like a Brene Brown who's
Yeah.
doing a lot of writing, Daring Greatly's. A lot of people know about that, and her research into shame and joy and transparency, I think, is a big one. It's something that people deal with. Alcoholic and addiction work is recovery work. You have to be transparent and deal with those sort of things, with overcoming shame and just being willing to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So Brene Brown is out there, and I really, God's a big influence in my life. Without God in my life to be the North Star,
Yeah.
that's first and foremost. I talked about that gratitude, and just keeping a daily kind of prayer and meditation practice going, and seeking help from pastoral care and counselors
Mm-hmm.
has been a big part of my walk and journey too.
Yeah, and those are both key components, I think. What about, so there, everybody has kind of their own, there's huge proponents of the 12 steps. There's huge proponents of the opposite of the 12 steps. 12 steps are terrible. You should do smart recovery, or you should do EMDR therapy. There's many, thousands and thousands of different recovery centers that have their own, own process for helping people go through something like this. What has been your experience in helping people through the program that you've put together? What are the responses?
The response is, well, a lot of it, to begin with, it's kind of like pulling off the Band-Aid.
Yeah.
It's like we're exposing some things here, and it may be a difficult process, but just stay with it, stay the course.
Mm-hmm.
I think, for a long time, AA was it.
Yeah.
And I think it's just as valid as it ever was.
Sure.
In some circles, it's kind of fragmenting, and people are, as you say, are going to other modalities. And if that works, great.
Mm-hmm.
If that works for them, great. With this, it's a time to, both kind of look in introspectively and say, okay, what's, accepting life on life's terms, and then walking forward with that. When you get into a place of chaos in your life and things get unmanageable,
Yeah.
how are you going to walk out of that? You kind of wake up and say, okay, I realize what's going on. And are you going to stand up and walk out of that? Or is someone going to drag you out of it? So it's kind of like that picture. It's like, what's going to allow you to stand up
Yeah.
and look straight ahead and walk? And you may need someone on both sides kind of picking you up and saying, okay, you're kind of got to get your legs under you. So I'm not under the idea that it has to be just one way. It has to be AA, or it has to be this, or it has to be that. I think it's a more holistic approach.
Yeah.
And it's each person just being honest, and fearless as much as they can with where they are now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a great point. A lot of people say it's kind of my way or the highway with certain things, and that doesn't work for everybody. There are a lot of options. People are raised differently. People have different problems, different issues. I think, a big thing is sort of what you said, is dealing with some of the stuff that's going on in our head. You use, gratitude. You've used that phrase multiple times. You've talked about your faith. You've talked about these concepts of shame, and there are different ways that people deal and process with each one of those different concepts, not to mention all of the other concepts. Mm-hmm. So it is important that people find something that works for them. What about, so your program is an online program. I think one of the criticisms, of course, is going to be that it's an online program. Mm-hmm. It's not, right. It's not an in-person program. It's not sort of one of these intensive components where you go and you're in a rehab facility for 30 days or something, which is fine. Where does your program fit in sort of the grand scheme of things? Let's say somebody realizes, hey, I just went on a bender. They go to a detox center. They go to a 30-day inpatient center. Then they have intensive outpatient stuff. Is your program something that is complementary to that? Should this be something that people who are, maybe toying with the idea of potentially getting help should go through? Kind of what part of the puzzle does this fit into?
Great question. So this is moving in today, people have access online. This is available through any device. So wherever they are, if they have access to a device, they have access to the material. Who is this? This is for people that are just kind of barely coming onto the ground of sobriety, and they're saying, hey, I need some help. Maybe it's people that have come out of recovery programs. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's people that are thinking about going into recovery programs, but they need something right now. This is, addiction isolates people.
Yeah.
And you're in your room somewhere, and maybe you're not reaching out for help. Maybe you're not ready to go into an in-treatment program. Maybe you're not ready to step into the rooms of an AA or a Celebrate Recovery. Maybe you're just kind of not sure. But this can kind of be a bridge.
Yeah.
This is the way I see it. It reaches people where they are and then encourages them to also make that face-to-face connection with support groups and counseling as they need to. So this isn't a complete solution within itself. It's a bigger issue. But it's a piece and it's a part for those people coming onto the ground of sobriety, or maybe they've already been there for a period of time.
Yeah.
But like I came in and out of sobriety and relapse and recurrences to addiction. So maybe you just need some help in staying there, right, in maintaining that sobriety. And this is a daily support for that.
Yeah. And so it will give them a little bit of a spark maybe to say, I'm not comfortable enough going into an AA room or a SMART meeting or calling a substance abuse counselor, because a lot of that, I think the initial hurdle for people is that shame that you talked about. I can't tell you how much I think that shame is a huge problem. One of my, a guy in my men's group told me sort of the difference between guilt and shame. Have you ever heard that distinction? So guilt being that, guilt is, I screwed up, I did something wrong, I shouldn't have done that, but it's regarding that thing. Whereas shame is, I'm wrong, I'm bad, I'm broken, there's something wrong with me. And so with guilt, you can do something to address that. But with shame, you can't. And so many people get kind of caught up in the shame. They say, I'm broken, I'm terrible, nobody, I'm worthless. We see this a lot with a lot of our clients who are going through these things. And there's a real problem, a real difficulty in getting them to bridge the gap into one-on-one therapy or the treatment or checking themselves into a place. And I think your program is brilliant in that it is accessible in their home. It's very robust. It's very thorough. Can you walk me through kind of what it is like practically for a person to go through this? So they say, okay, maybe they listen to you on this podcast and they say, hey, maybe I have been drinking too much, or maybe my husband has, and I got to have a conversation with them. Walk us through what it's like. So as soon as they enroll in the program, what are they getting? What, is it a series of videos? Do they get homework? Kind of give us kind of an overview on how it functions, practically speaking.
So they get started, and each day they're going to receive a lesson. And the lessons are a combination of reading material, text, and also embedded video that they can access regarding different subjects. So really it's about 20 minutes.
Okay.
We thought, well, maybe we'll do an hour-long lesson every day. And we're like, no, maybe that's a little too long.
Yeah.
So we're like plus or minus 20 minutes. Some are a little shorter, some are a little bit longer. But it's accessing, right from the first module. Mm-hmm. It really seeks to establish a transparency so the person has the opportunity to say, hey, yes, I really do have an issue here. And this is kind of what it looks like. Mm-hmm. And so they get a chance to reflect and come to terms with where they are, that they do need some assistance and help, and they can start to understand the nature of addiction. They can start to understand the need to kind of maybe restructure their environment a little bit, to make some small changes right from the beginning, because as they say, how to eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? This is a big move and a big change, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And if people are overwhelmed with where they are, kind of the clutter in their life, their emotional clutter in their life, they just need to kind of start. Yeah. So get started. That's where this whole thing begins. You're getting started, you're making small changes, you're moving in the right direction, and So you start to get familiar with the language of recovery, and start to get in touch with maybe what's been holding you back. So you can start to identify the things that are happening.
Yeah, and I like that. So this stuff is kind of automatically delivered to their inbox.
It is.
Yeah, so they
just click on it each day, and they're brought directly to the lesson, and then the next day they're brought to another one. So it's kind of dripped down, one lesson at a time, one day at a time. And I encourage people to find a kind of a quiet place, separate out a little bit, find a space that you can say, hey, I'm doing this today, get rid of any distractions, I'm going into the lesson. And then you'll have access to all your previous lessons as you go, so you can review the material.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great, because people, one of the big things with any recovery program or any treatment is compliance, essentially, is the word for it. How do you get people who are going to enter a program and then stick through it? I had lunch with a lady from Scottsdale, Providence, which is a recovery center here in Arizona, and we were talking about that. She said that about I don't want to use her name or anything because I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but it's about 60 to 75 to 70% compliance with their program, which to me sounded kind of low until she told me that no, I mean the general average is like 40%. Like 40% of the people who go into a treatment program complete it. The other 60% do what's called AMA. They leave against medical advice, meaning they're in a treatment program, they leave anyways because I had enough of this, and they're gone. And this is an intensive program. This is where people are, actually in there getting one-on-one treatment and all of that stuff, but then leave. They just say, I don't want to do it anymore. It's enough of that. How do you see that playing out with your program? Do you have numbers about that, or I know this is a fairly new thing. I know you were just beta testing it, so you probably don't have those numbers, but what's your position on that? How are people going to be complying with your program?
So they have access to it from whatever device they're on electronically. So they can log in at any time. And you're right, they may step away.
Yeah.
Maybe they say, hey, I've gone through a week of this, and then maybe they get distracted and they step away from it. It's there for them when they come back.
Sure.
So it's not like they're suddenly kicked out. Because they're going to need to choose to engage. Just like anything. If you're being forced to do it, or if it's an obligation to do it, sometimes, you can fake it till you make it. Maybe you don't have like a real strong inspiration and motivation when you get started, and maybe that has to develop. Maybe they have to get a little bit of momentum as they go into it. And the first module is kind of designed that way. Each day kind of builds on each other to give them some momentum in going in that direction. And are you gonna get 100% compliance with people going through it? No, you're not gonna with any of them. But we design it in a way to try to give them that daily inspiration to make a decision for themselves that this is important enough. I'm important enough, to continue doing this.
Right. Yeah, and you never know what day, what content, what message, what lesson somebody's going to click on, and that is that epiphany moment, just like the one that you had, the one where you saw that book when you were in where you were, and boom, that kind of was the revelation that you needed to make a change in your life. You never know which one of those messages is going to hit. It's one of those things where every time I open up the big book, I read something, and I read it a little bit differently because my life is different than it was a year ago when I read it the last time. And so you never really know, and your mechanism of constantly kind of dripping that content out and saying, hey, we're here. If you need us, we're here. Come get us.
And as they're digging into this material each day, they're given suggested action steps. Okay. So, if you have 63 days worth, there's at least 63, probably more, action steps to take. And they're, again, suggested action steps. So if they do 2 or 3 of those seriously and wholeheartedly, that's going to bring them into a new place. So, you hear in recovery, people give advice that have gone before you.
Yeah.
And some people are anxious to give you advice and help you along. And the phrase is what, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
So if this applies to you, if you feel this resonates with you, and it might hit, it might click, and might really propel you into something new. And you never do know exactly when it's going to be. It takes some people months to get into a clear view of sobriety. It takes some people years,
Yeah.
and it takes some people decades.
Right.
And I remember I was at an AA meeting years ago, and I remember some people talking to me. They were probably in their 40s, where I am now, and I was in my 20s at the time. And they said, "Oh, it's really good that you're getting help now.
Yeah.
That you're not waiting." And I thought about that conversation with this lady years later and said, well, here I am trying to get help again.
Right.
It can take a long time for people to wake up to it, but
Yeah, it does. It does. There's no question about it. It takes, some time to get the plane off the runway. You're kind of bouncing around a little bit, and then finally you get lift off.
But then, do you have to hit bottom? That's
Yeah.
another question.
Right.
Or what does that look like? Or can you maybe turn away from addictive patterns? Can you say, hey, wait a minute, I see where this is going.
Yeah.
This is not a good place to go.
Yeah.
Maybe I can turn around now.
Yeah. And that's a great point, because it's a difficult thing, and it's different for everybody. You can't assess it for everybody. We were talking about, the bottoms, a high bottom or a low bottom, and people are across the spectrum on it. Sometimes people have to kill somebody before they realize, hey, I'm going to spend the rest of my life in jail. Or I would say that I kind of had a realization. I was fortunate enough that I didn't have to have a number of DUIs or anything like that. I just realized, how problematic this was for me. So I didn't have a very low bottom. I would say I had a high bottom. But that being said, I had to be ready for it, right? This is the problem. And when we have our men's group meetings on Tuesday, I can't tell you how many guys come in and they sit down with us, and we have this small group of men who circle around each other and want to support each other and fortify one another. But there's a group of guys who come in, they sit down, they tell us they get the message, and they don't. They're back out there again the next day. So what we kind of teach people, or we encourage people to do, which sounds really kind of terrible in a lot of ways, but if you're not ready, then you got to go back out there and get ready. You have to go do whatever it is you need to do. And I know your program's not a 12-step based, but there's a part in the big book that says you basically have to have tried everything to solve this problem on your own before you can realize that you need help from somebody else. If you tried drinking, only after noon, if you tried drinking only on the weekends, if you haven't tried milk with your vodka, if you've only tried, whatever it is, go back out there and do it until you realize this is unmanageable. I cannot do this on my own. I do need a higher power. I do need support. I need to find a system for it. But it's a great point. You got to be ready for it.
Yeah, and if what you're doing is not working, if something's broken there, you're at the end of your rope, right? It's like, okay, wait a minute. What am I going to do now? But that's a really great point you're making. They do. How do you know when you're ready? It's like a glass being full. If your glass is full and you've got it all figured out and you know what you're doing, and you got it all together, you don't need any help. But you keep stumbling and coming home, and whatever the case may be. But then if you say, okay, wait a minute, maybe something's missing here.
Yeah.
And then you're ready to learn.
Yeah. It's great. I think you're doing great work. What's the kind of the future plan for this? I mean, I know you're just kind of transitioning from a beta, and now you're running with this thing. I know you're still working on a couple modules, I think. What's the future look like for 24/7?
So, right, the content's still in development, and even after this, core offering is done, we'll continue to develop. We are it's kind of gone from project phase to incorporation phase. So we're going to be incorporating 24/7 sobriety here very shortly, within a week or so.
Great.
And just getting it off the ground. So it will be hopefully a part of the puzzle here for helping turn the tide of addiction in our generation now. I think there's a lot of people dealing with addiction in various ways, and we need to address it and talk to people about it. So we're going to connect with as many people as we can, whoever will listen.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that's a testament to your belief in it. I mean, it's a difficult thing to hop on a podcast and talk about some of that stuff. I mean, it's not something that people want to talk about. You know, I ask people to fill out this form. Is there anything you do not want me to talk about? And a lot of the times people put on there these types of issues, you know, because it's a scary thing to get out there and publicize it. But, you know, it's one of those things also, if nobody talked about it, then you can't help that next person. You can't, people are going to resonate with the message and they're going to say, yeah, you know, that's a perfect program. Maybe this is something I should start thinking about. I can't tell you how many friends have told me that. They've messaged me and said, "Hey, man, I appreciate what you've said. I don't know that I need to go to an AA meeting or anything like that, but you know, maybe I should start thinking about it."
Well, I don't think you can underestimate the value of raising your hand. It's
Yeah.
like, hey, listen, I need some help, or I kind of screwed this up a little bit, and you raise your hand. And if you're willing to do that,
Yeah.
then most of the time people are pretty forgiving of you. But if you kind of keep it to yourself and you're sitting there like, I didn't get this done, or I kind of fudged this a little bit, or I'm kind of messing up over here, but you don't say anything, and then suddenly it comes out to your spouse or to your boss or whoever it is,
Right.
and they're like, what happened? Then they're calling you out on it. But if you're willing to raise your hand and say, hey, yeah, I've had some issues, and yeah, I need some help, then people are usually all too willing to extend a hand and give that support.
Yeah.
And that's what we're about, is people who are ready to stand up and say, hey, yeah, I need a little help
Yeah.
here.
To help you through it. Yeah. And that's, I think that's been something that's been instrumental in my journey. It's been this idea that in order for me to be totally fortified, I need to keep myself in that middle position. So I'm in the middle, but to one side, I have a guy with more time, more experience, more sobriety, more life lessons. He's been, you know, further ahead down the road. But then on the other side is somebody who's new, somebody who's got less time than me, somebody who can look up to me as sort of a guide and a leader because I'm a little bit further along in the journey than they are. And then, you know, that person who's the new guy, they got to go get somebody else, and they got to fortify themselves and put themselves into that middle position and keep that chain churning, helping the next person down the road.
I love that idea of mentoring and turning around, like I've talked about, when you've been through the trenches of something, you've been there, and you can really use that experience to help somebody else. So
yeah, and that's what I love about your program, and there's a lot of authenticity to it, and it's a lot of great stuff. I mean, just looking through the curriculum, the modules that you put together, I mean, each one of these things is just so important, which has been kind of a lesson, and I'm sure you can probably attest to this. But the idea of going through recovering, dealing with your substance, it's dealing more than just that. It's more than just, oh, I've got this chemical problem in my brain. I like alcohol. It makes me feel good, so I like to drink a lot of it. You know, you've got these different things going on in your life. You've got problems with your thinking. You've got resentments. You've got anger issues. You've got, you know, codependency, whatever they are. Everybody's got their own issues, which usually will manifest itself in a substance abuse disorder. I'm not a psychologist. I don't intend to play one, or a psychiatrist or any of those things. I'm not an expert in it. But what you're talking about in your program is emotional intelligence, finding serenity, you know, how you have joy and happiness, uncovering fear and resentment. You've got a lot of all these different concepts that are not just great for substance abuse, but it's great for life. It's important to live your life according to a lot of these principles. You'll be a more effective person.
it's about connection, Rob, in a lot of ways. All of this leads to connection. You know, the chemical hooks that get in with people with substance use and abuse, yeah, it's a factor. But really more so even is this sense of disconnection or isolation. And when you have connection and relationships you want to be present for, that are valuable to you, that you care about, then you're not going to turn to that stuff
Yeah.
as much. So it's cultivating healthy connections in relationship, family, which is sometimes the hardest, and with, you know, community, with peers,
Yeah.
and having that network of people that you feel, you know, you could call any one of them up and say, hey, how you doing today? Hey, I got an issue. I'm dealing with this.
Right.
And they'd listen.
Right.
And you'd be the same for them.
Right.
Picking up that phone call, responding to that text or that message or whatever's going on. So that's a big part of this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Are there plans to kind of help facilitate? So this is an online program. Are there plans to connect people?
So throughout the lessons and the modules, we're pointing to helpful links and resources, whether it be a recovery meeting, and just different places people can go. So we'd like to think that people will take that next step.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
actually take the lessons that they're learning offline and take those out into the world and actually make those connections with people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and get those thoughts out there. Yeah, that's amazing work. So let me ask you, where can people connect with you if they want to enroll in the program, if they want to discuss further with you, if they're, at a center, if they're counselors or any one of those things? What are the best places for people to make your acquaintance?
I am grateful for having been surrounded with some really great people in this project right now.
Yeah.
Barry Bear is our project lead, and he's kind of taking the calls and the emails for groups that want to get involved.
Great.
And they can connect with me directly too at Raymond at 247sobrietysuccess.com. Barry's email, Barry at 247sobrietysuccess.com. You can go to the website, 247sobrietysuccess.com. You can see the background, the history, how that works out, how to contact us.
Yeah, and there's really a lot of great information there. I think it's a beautiful program. I am very excited to follow along with it and support you in any way that we can.
I appreciate it.
And I really want to thank you for coming on the show, Raymond. I love what you're doing. I think it's really a gift to people who need it. So thanks for all that you're doing, and thank you again for being here, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Rob.